Welcome, everyone. This is our fun little study group for PP 5340, Introduction to Public Policy and Management.
Yep, glad you could join us.
We're basically taking the required readings, the dense academic stuff, and trying to, boil it down, pull out the core insights you really need for your policy work.
Make it make sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today, we are cracking open a really foundational text, Race and Social Equity, a nervous area of government. We're starting right at the beginning, Chapter 1.
That's right. And for everyone in PP 5340, this chapter is crucial. It introduces a concept that's going to frame pretty much everything we discuss about public management and justice.
Which is?
This idea of organizational nervousness. Our mission today really is to unpack that. Why does government, this structure we think of as rational, efficient, why does it often get so, paralyzed, so strained and uncomfortable when it has to deal directly with racial equity?
It's not just about feelings, is it?
No, not at all. The argument is that this nervousness is about a failure to deliver on what government is supposed to do.
And the authors signal right away how serious this is. They kick off with that Jennifer Hochschild quote, which is pretty provocative.
Which one is that?
Americans must face up to their dream and decide whether they really mean it to be a reality. That hits hard. It suggests there's a big gap, maybe a painful one, between what we say we want and what actually happens.
Definitely sets a serious tone. And to help us grasp this idea of organizational nervousness, the book actually starts small, at the human level.
Right. What does it feel like for a person to be nervous?
We all know it, right? It's that stress response.
Yeah.
Emotional, physical. Usually when you're facing something threatening or anticipating something difficult or painful.
Yeah, the book mentions the obvious external signs. Sweaty palms pacing around.
Hands trembling, maybe, if you're trying to do something under pressure.
Exactly. Your body is basically screaming, I'm uncomfortable. This isn't my normal operating zone.
And then there's the internal stuff the text points out. That knot in your stomach.
Oh.
Trouble focusing, maybe your appetite changes. The key thing, though, is when that nervousness starts messing with your ability to function. Just do your job, the daily tasks. That's when it becomes debilitating.
Okay, so debilitating stress. Now take that feeling, that human experience, and apply it to a bureaucracy, an institution that's supposed to be all about rules, rationality, efficiency. What's the core argument, the thesis we need to grab onto from this chapter?
It's a big one. The central argument is this. Social equity, and specifically racial equity, is a nervous area of government.
A nervous area?
Yeah. It's not just political disagreements or, resource constraints, though those exist. It's deeper. It's like an organizational inability to function effectively when it's forced to look hard at its own role in creating or maintaining racial disparities.
So the implication is?
The implication is huge. Unless this nervousness is seen, acknowledged, and actually managed proactively, public administration just can't reach its potential. It can't effectively reduce these inequities.
And the text makes the point that this isn't new, this failure to deal with the discomfort. It just lets the problems pile up, compound over centuries even.
It's a heavy thought. And what's really interesting is that this whole idea, this framework, it didn't just come out of thin air, theoretically. It actually came from observing people on the ground.
Ah, you mean the Wisconsin story?
Yeah.
The phrase itself came from.
Exactly, that anecdote. The researchers were studying the steering committee in Wisconsin, senior administrators, high-level people.
And they had a tough job.
Extremely tough. Their mandate was to conduct a really rigorous examination of racial disparities in the state's huge welfare program. Super sensitive stuff.
And as they did interviews,
the word nervous just kept popping up. These experienced public servants used it again and again to describe the situation, the work.
Until one person just nailed it.
Yeah, one senior administrator basically synthesized it perfectly. They said, examining racial disparities is a nervous area of government. Boom. It showed that this discomfort, this nervousness, was the real underlying context making progress so hard, even for the people tasked with making it happen.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It grounds the concept. So if nervousness is now part of the public administration vocabulary,
a specific term, yeah.
we need to understand where it came from conceptually. It's not totally brand new, right? It connects to older ideas about how bureaucracies work or don't work.
Exactly. You can't really understand this organizational nervousness without looking back at some classic critiques of bureaucracy. The authors draw a clear line back to Robert Merton, 1952, his work on the dysfunctions of bureaucracies.
Merton's foundational, right? He pointed out that we usually praise bureaucracies for being organized, standardized.
The good stuff.
Yeah, the positive achievements. But we tend to ignore the internal problems. the stresses, the strains within the system itself.
And Merton flagged things like structural sources of overconformity and trained incapacity. Those are key here.
Trained incapacity. Remind us.
It's when someone is trained so well in specific rules or procedures, or maybe focus purely on efficiency metrics, that they become incapable of dealing with anything new that falls outside those rules. Their training actually blinds them or makes them unable to act.
Okay, I see the link. So if your whole training is about, say, cost effectiveness, doing things cheap,
Right.
you're going to be structurally incapable, or at least very nervous, about dealing with data that suggests you need less efficient, more customized solutions to achieve racial equity.
Precisely. Your very expertise becomes a disability when faced with this kind of problem. That's a structural source of the nervousness.
Okay, so that's Merton's contribution. The rigidity.
Now add another layer. Think about the internal group dynamics. Peter Blau's work from 1963.
What did Blau find?
He showed how the internal culture of an organization really fuels this discomfort. Unofficial norms develop, like little agreements within groups about how things really work.
Stuff that's not in the rule book.
Exactly. And groups often try to hide certain behaviors, especially things that might look bad or shameful or just contradict the official policy goals, like, say, the organization's persistent failure to achieve racial equity goals.
And Blau noted that if someone inside the group dares to question those norms, like asks why racial gaps are ignored,
They get pushback. Emotional reactions, maybe hostility. People might even try to push them out, ostracize them to keep the group's comfort zone intact. That's internal organizational nervousness playing out right there, protecting the status quo.
Okay, so we have rigidity from training and group pressure to conform.
And then there's Anthony Downs, 1967. He identified 4 major biases that he argued affect pretty much all public administrators, no matter the issue. And these biases are crucial for how information, especially sensitive information about failure or disparity, moves through the organization. Or doesn't move.
These seem really important for us, for the students in PP 5340, to recognize. Because they explain how the truth gets, well, bent out of shape as it goes up the ladder, making the nervousness worse.
Definitely. The first bias Downs identified is distorting information that gets passed upward.
Covering your back, basically.
Sort of. Administrators often have a sense of what their bosses want or don't want to hear. Bad news about persistent racial inequity, that's usually unwelcome news. So maybe they soften the data or frame failures as just isolated incidents, not systemic problems.
Okay, distorting info. What's the second?
Exhibiting biased attitudes towards certain policies. So if an administrator is personally uncomfortable with, say, race-conscious remedies, they might subtly downplay how important or feasible those options are when they're presenting choices to their superiors. Their personal bias shapes the policy options.
Third bias.
Varying compliance with directives based on personal favor, or maybe based on how much hassle it causes.
So if a new directive comes down to start tracking racial equity data really closely,
A nervous administrator, or one who just doesn't favor it, might put more energy into other tasks. They comply, but maybe just minimally. Drag their feet. It's not outright defiance, but it slows things down.
I know, last one.
Varying willingness to assume risk or seek new responsibilities. Let's face it, tackling racial equity is inherently risky. It's sensitive, politically charged.
Yeah.
This bias means that the people in the organization who are maybe the most creative, the most ambitious, they might shy away from leading this kind of work because they fear the potential backlash, internal or external.
So putting it all together, Merton's rigidity, Blau's group conformity, Downs' information biases.
The synthesis is pretty clear, isn't it? Nervousness isn't just a small side effect. It's this persistent, often unacknowledged background condition. It arises from all these internal bureaucratic strains coming together. And when you introduce a really sensitive, historically loaded topic like racial equity into that mix, bam! That's when these forces combine to create that debilitating organizational strain we're talking about.
Okay, that really lays the groundwork. And it leads us to a really important distinction the chapter makes. It's about shifting focus, isn't it? Moving from just looking inside the organization to looking outside. The difference between public justice and employee justice.
That's a critical pivot. A lot of the time when people study organizational justice, especially coming from maybe an HR background,
Yeah, human resources.
the focus is very much internal. It's about fairness for employees, things like recruitment, pay, promotions, how conflicts are handled, layoffs.
And those things are important, obviously. You need fair internal processes for morale, for basic decency.
Absolutely vital. But the text argues that if an organization stops there, it's missing the bigger picture, its core mission. You could have, I don't know, perfectly fair internal hiring practices and still be completely failing to serve the public equitably. The internal focus isn't enough.
So this nervous area of government idea, it forces a shift.
It demands it. It demands a systemic approach where the top priority is the experience of the public the organization serves. Not just the internal comfort or fairness for the employees, but the impact on citizens.
And that's where public justice comes in. How are they defining that?
Think of public justice as the big umbrella value. It's the overarching organizational commitment, the belief system that makes fair service delivery possible in the first place.
Okay, and social equity.
Social equity sits within that larger value of public justice. Social equity is more specific. It's about the actual nitty-gritty delivery of services. Are benefits allocated fairly? Are resources distributed equitably? Are the outcomes the same for different groups? Public justice is the philosophical foundation. Social equity is the concrete practice.
I can see a potential problem here for administrators. If you know that focusing on employee justice creates maybe low-level nervousness, it's predictable, you can manage it with HR policies, but focusing on public justice, especially racial equity, generates that high-intensity, risky nervousness we talked about.
There's a huge incentive to just stick with the internal stuff. Play it safe.
Keep the internal peace, even if it means ignoring external inequity.
That's the tension right there. That's the core conflict. All those factors from Merton Blau Downs, they kind of push towards maintaining internal comfort. Often, that's directly at odds with tackling difficult external goals like racial equity. Which brings us, really, to the model the chapter lays out. The structure that explains how organizations sometimes do break through that inertia.
Right, figure 1.1 in the text. The conceptual model of nervousness. It looks at this structurally, explaining how outside pressures push on the inside parts of the organization and how that affects public justice. We should probably start with the catalysts, the things that force the organization to even look at racial equity in the first place.
Good place to start. Because organizations, let's be honest, rarely decide to do this stressful self-examination just for fun. They're usually pushed into it by something external. The model identifies 4 main types of triggers.
Okay, what's the first?
First is the political catalyst. This is when the motivation comes from elected officials. Maybe it's part of their platform, or a specific legislative body decides to focus on it.
The book gives that example of Seattle's former mayor, Greg Nichols.
Exactly. His leadership was apparently key in pushing the city's race and social justice initiative. The push came from the top, politically.
Okay, political pressure. What's next?
Second is the legal catalyst. This could be new laws, regulations, court decisions, or, very often, the threat of litigation from advocacy groups.
Like the ACLU or an NAACP.
Right. Legal action creates undeniable pressure. It's external, it's formal, you can't easily ignore it or spin it away.
And that Wisconsin welfare example we mentioned earlier that was triggered legally, wasn't it? By a complaint from the ACLU and NAACP.
Precisely. The state had to respond to that formal challenge. It wasn't optional.
Okay, political, legal. What was the third trigger?
The economic motivator. This one's interesting because it sometimes works when other arguments fail. It frames racial equity not just as the right thing to do, but as the smart thing to do financially.
Cost-benefit analysis for equity.
Yeah, or efficiency arguments. The book uses that Denver study on homelessness. It found that providing housing and support services for someone chronically homeless cost around $15,000 a year.
Which sounds like a lot, but
it was less than the $30,000 plus that same person cost the city through ER visits, police time, jail stays, and so on when they were living on the street.
wow. So framing equity as actually saving money can be a powerful trigger.
It can bypass some of the usual resistance. And the fourth trigger.
A moral one.
Right. This is about pressure from the ground up, grassroots activism, big media exposés, changing public opinion, broad societal shifts. Think about the civil rights movement in the 60s. The moral pressure led to huge legislative changes.
Okay, so these 4 forces, political, legal, economic, moral, they basically land the issue on someone's desk. Who's next in the model?
That pressure lands squarely on the senior public administrators, the bosses, the department heads, agency directors.
The text calls them translators of power because they hold the real authority, right? Budgets, personnel, setting the agenda.
Exactly. They control the tangible resources. And the chapter connects their role to Selznick's classic ideas about leadership, divining the mission, embodying the purpose, defending the organization's integrity, keeping order inside.
So when one of these external catalysts hits hard,
These senior administrators have to translate that pressure into actual internal action or inaction. Their response is absolutely critical. It shapes the whole agency's commitment to public justice. They decide if the organization acts, and importantly, how intensely it acts.
and their response sets the tone for nervousness too, doesn't it?
Totally. They control the intensity of nervousness felt throughout the agency. If they react defensively, minimize the problem, don't allocate resources, they basically signal what level of racial analysis is acceptable or unacceptable within the agency. Their nervousness or their courage trickles down.
Which brings us to the people on the front lines.
Yeah.
The biggest group in the model.
The public servants. Or, as Michael Lipsky famously called them, the street-level bureaucrats.
Teachers, police officers, social workers, judges.
All the frontline staff. The ones making constant, daily decisions that have a huge impact on people's lives, on their life chances.
And Lipsky's big insight was that they don't just implement policy.
They effectively become the policy through their discretion. They're mediating citizenship, in a way, through thousands of small judgments every day.
The book gives examples, right? Like
Yeah.
a police officer deciding who gets arrested versus who gets a warning.
Or a teacher deciding which students are teachable and worth extra effort. A judge deciding on a sentence. Even, the text mentions, prison guards writing up reports based on subjective things like silent insolence.
Wow. That's subtle but powerful.
Incredibly powerful. These small discretionary acts, when repeated over and over, add up to big systemic patterns of inequitable service. And their actions are shaped by...
The organizational culture, the values.
Exactly. Which takes us to the fourth element in the model, organizational values. The text calls this the single most important factor.
Because the culture sets the priorities.
Right. Every agency has a hierarchy of values, even if it's unwritten. Is efficiency number one? Is keeping things running smoothly, maintaining the status quo, the top goal? Or is achieving racial equity actually a high priority?
And if efficiency or the status quo always wins.
Then racial equity efforts will always lose out when resources get tight or when things get uncomfortable, nervous.
So how can we tell? As students or practitioners, how do we know if racial equity is really valued in an agency?
The clearest sign, according to the text, is whether people actually talk about it. Is it okay to have conversations about racial equity, both spoken and written? Are disparities discussed openly in meetings? Is data broken down by race and actually analyzed?
If the conversation is happening consistently.
Then the value is likely real. If the topic is always avoided, danced around, treated like a third rail, then the value is low, no matter what the official mission statement says.
Okay, so all these pieces, catalysts, senior managers, street-level bureaucrats, values they interact to determine the level of nervousness. Let's talk about that continuum.
Right, the nervousness continuum. It describes the organization's state of engagement with racial equity. There are basically three states.
First is
Low intensity. This is the default, maybe. The organization is minimally engaged. The topic is avoided. It's the comfort zone, the status quo. Not much is happening on racial equity.
and things get shaken up.
Exactly. A catalyst hits and the organization might move into high intensity. This is like crisis mode. It's often the early stage of actually trying to engage. Things are stressful, the culture is shifting, maybe there's conflict. Internal strain nervousness is maxed out.
And the book says this state, while maybe necessary to kickstart change, isn't sustainable long-term.
Right. You can't operate at peak stress forever. And this is a critical point.
No.
If the senior leadership doesn't manage this high intensity well, if they get defensive or don't provide support or try to shut it down, the organization often just snaps back, retreats to the safety of low intensity.
So the goal isn't high intensity.
No, the goal is the third state, moderate intensity.
What does that look like?
Moderate intensity means the nervousness is being managed effectively. It hasn't vanished. Maybe it never fully does. But the organization is using that tension productively.
So discomfort is still there, but it's channeled.
Exactly. Racial equity analysis is treated as a vital core function. It's normal, expected work. Discomfort is acknowledged, maybe even welcomed, as part of the process of delivering services more effectively and equitably. Like, maybe a team routinely reports on racial gaps in outcomes, not as a crisis, but as standard operating procedure. They integrate the nervousness instead of running from it.
Okay, this model is really helpful, but we need to tackle the elephant in the room, right? Why race? The book asks this directly. Social equity covers gender, class, disability, lots of things. Why zero in on race so intensely?
It's a fair question. And the text argues, look, all dimensions of inequity are important, but historically and currently in the U.S., the racial equity piece generates by far the most nervousness. It's uniquely charged. And understanding how government fails on race is fundamental to understanding its broader failures on justice.
They bring back W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah, his famous line from 1900. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. The argument is it hasn't gone away in the 21st.
And the data backs that up, unfortunately. The text cites Glenn Loury.
Right. Lowry points out the huge, persistent racial gaps today across so many critical areas: wages, unemployment, wealth accumulation, test scores, who's in prison, health outcomes. These are all areas where public policy plays a massive role.
And Loury reminds us that race isn't biological here, it's a social construct.
Exactly. It's about how society attaches meaning to physical differences, and it's those social meanings and their consequences that public administration has to grapple with, which leads us straight into the concept of structural racism.
Okay. Structural racism, developed by folks like Johnny Powell. It sounds like it goes beyond just blaming individuals or even single institutions. What's the core idea for us in public policy?
The core idea is that racial inequity isn't just about isolated acts of prejudice. It's built into the structure of society. It examines how lots of different factors, public policies, the way institutions operate, even cultural messages, all work together to create and maintain racial gaps.
And it emphasizes how these systems benefit white people and disadvantage people of color, and how that pattern persists over time.
Precisely. It's about durable, interconnected systems. And the text makes a really useful distinction here to help administrators think about where to intervene. Discrimination in contract versus discrimination in contact.
Okay, break those down.
Structural racism is primarily concerned with discrimination in contract. That means bias that gets standardized, baked into formal systems and transactions. Think about mortgage lending patterns, zoning laws that segregate communities, school funding formulas, maybe even standardized tests that have biased outcomes. It's the bias embedded in the rules and processes of public and private bureaucracies.
And discrimination in contact.
That's more about the bias in informal person-to-person interactions, like who someone chooses to be friends with or who they want living next door. That kind of discrimination is obviously harmful too.
But the structural argument is
That the contract discrimination, the systemic organizational kind, is the real engine driving large-scale, persistent inequality. That's where public policy has the most leverage.
Okay, to make this more concrete, the text uses Kubrich's work to outline 5 contexts where structural racism operates. What are they?
Right, these help show how it works. First is the values context.
What does that mean?
It's about the dominant mindset, the widely held belief that America is already a land of equal opportunity, a pure meritocracy.
The American dream idea we talked about.
Exactly. And if you believe that, then you tend to blame lack of success solely on individual shortcomings, lack of effort, bad choices, cultural deficits. It lets the system off the hook. And it's a great defense against feeling nervous about disparities because the blame is always externalized.
Okay, values. Second context.
Knowledge.
Yeah.
This is about normalizing racial inequities. Just accepting huge disparities in, say, the justice system or school achievement as normal, as just the way things are.
Like shrugging your shoulders at the data.
Pretty much. It requires actively not questioning why those disparities exist or persist, kind of willful ignorance.
Third is cultural.
This involves the way media and culture portray different racial groups, allowing stereotypes about criminality or intelligence or work ethic to circulate reinforces negative biases that everyone, including public servants, absorb. The psychological context. This is about how the structure reinforces feelings of entitlement for white people, and often a corresponding sense of non-entitlement or lower expectations for people of color. This affects everything from how people advocate for themselves to how public services are delivered.
And the last one, political.
This is the direct exercise of power in ways that maintain the existing racial hierarchy and privilege. Think about things like drawing electoral districts to dilute minority voting power, laws that make it harder for certain groups to vote, or even just consistent legislative inaction on issues known to disproportionately harm communities of color.
The structural view feels much broader than just institutional racism. How are they different?
It's a key difference. Institutional racism usually focuses on the rules and culture within a single institution, like one specific police department or one school district.
Oh.
Structural racism looks at how multiple institutions and sectors interact and reinforce each other. It's how housing policy interacts with school policy, which interacts with employment practices, which interacts with the justice system. It's the cumulative impact across the whole system that creates such stubborn, durable racial inequality.
Wow. Okay. Seeing it that way.
Yeah.
It leads to a really stark conclusion about the usual approach, doesn't it? Colorblindness.
Absolutely. The text is really clear. Colorblind approaches don't work. They actually make things worse.
Lowry argues we have to explicitly make racial equality the goal, not just pretending race doesn't exist.
Exactly. Because if the system already has racial bias baked into it, acting like you don't see race just means you're letting that bias continue unchallenged. You often need race-conscious policies to counteract existing race-based disparities.
And Guinea and Torres say colorblindness leads to paralysis.
Yeah, if you're forbidden from even talking about race or naming racial disparities, how can you possibly design policies to fix them? You're stuck.
And Bonilla Silva's point about ideological armor.
That's powerful. He suggests that just like old school, overt racism had its justifications, colorblindness today serves as the modern justification, the armor, for a system that still produces racially unequal outcomes. It lets white privilege continue quietly, institutionally, without needing overt prejudice, and it blocks the very conversations needed to dismantle it. That's the heart of the nervous area.
Okay, so if colorblindness fails, social equity has to be the alternative framework. Let's revisit the definition. Fairness for all, but sometimes requiring different treatment based on context, based on social characteristics.
That caveat is crucial. It's not about treating everyone identically always. It's about achieving fair outcomes, which sometimes means treating groups differently to account for existing or historical inequities. It's fairness in context. Public administrators need to pay attention to those differences.
And this idea has roots in public administration history, back to the 60s.
Definitely. The specific focus on social equity really took off then, particularly around the Middleburg conferences. H. George Frederickson was a key figure.
The Minnows, the young scholars there, they were reacting against the idea of the purely neutral, value-free administrator.
Exactly. They saw that a supposedly neutral government had presided over massive inequality, especially racial inequality. They argued that public administration had a moral obligation to actively promote social equity.
And this led to the new public administration movement.
Right. NPA, which Frederickson helped define, it wasn't just about efficiency. It was about values like responsiveness, citizen engagement, and centrally social equity. It was explicitly an advocacy movement.
And Frederickson's big contribution was framing social equity as the third pillar.
Yes. Putting it right alongside the traditional pillars of economy and efficiency, giving it equal weight, equal importance in how we evaluate public administration. That's fundamental for us in PP 5340.
And he gave administrators a practical tool. That's the second question.
The critical second question, every administrator asks the first one, is this program working? Is it efficient?
But the equity-focused administrator has to ask,
For whom is this program working? For whom is it good? That question forces you to disaggregate, to look beneath the surface averages and see who's benefiting and who's being left behind or even harmed.
it pushes past the assumption that a program helps everyone equally. Now, to make this more concrete for administrators, the National Academy of Public Administration, NAPI, came up with criteria for measuring equity. 4 of them.
Yes, NAPA laid out 4 key areas administrators need to examine. The first is procedural fairness.
Like due process, making sure the rules are applied fairly to everyone.
Exactly. Equal protection, fair hearings, consistent application of eligibility rules. Failures here could be things like racial profiling, where procedures are applied differently based on race, or denying proper appeals processes to certain groups. The process itself is biased.
Okay, procedural fairness. Second,
Access, which is also called distributional equity. This looks at whether everyone has the same opportunity to actually get the service or benefit. Are resources distributed evenly across different communities?
so examples might be fewer parks or libraries in poorer neighborhoods, or maybe unreliable public transit routes that cut off access to jobs for certain communities.
Perfect examples. It's about the physical or practical barriers to getting the same public goods. Third criterion.
Quality or process equity. This goes beyond just access, right?
Right. You might have access to a service, like a school or a hospital, but is the quality of that service the same for everyone? Are the resources, the staffing, the responsiveness consistent across different groups or neighborhoods?
So comparing things like teacher qualifications in different schools, or maybe waiting times in clinics, is garbage picked up as often and as well in all neighborhoods?
Exactly. It's about the standard of the service delivered, even if access technically exists. And the fourth criterion, which is often the toughest,
Outcomes.
outcomes. Does the policy or program actually have the same impact on the lives of people from different groups? This is where things get really complicated and often generate the most nervousness.
Because it forces you to ask about equal results.
Precisely. It acknowledges that because of historical disadvantage and structural barriers, simply providing the same service might not lead to the same outcome. Achieving equal results might require unequal inputs or targeted interventions.
And that raises huge questions about how much inequality is acceptable and how far government should go to fix it. Questions that really challenge those old norms of pure efficiency or simple equality of inputs.
It absolutely does. It forces a much deeper and often more uncomfortable conversation about what fairness really means in practice.
Mm.
And really, all of these threads, nervousness, structural racism, social equity, they all tie back to that core American narrative we started with, the American dream. The text argues there's this fundamental disconnect, the way we talk about the dream versus how opportunity actually works, especially considering this nervous area of government.
Hochschild's work identified three basic tenets of that dream, and the chapter kind of takes them apart, doesn't it? The first one is equal opportunity, the idea that everyone can participate equally, everyone gets a fresh start.
Yeah, and the immediate critique is, well, that's just not historically true, is it? For huge parts of American history, women, Native Americans, Black Americans, Asian Americans, the poor, they were structurally excluded from equal participation. The starting line was never equal. Policy has to reckon with that legacy.
Okay, second tenet, reasonable anticipation of success.
This assumes that the basic conditions are there are enough resources, decent schools, stable communities, so that everyone has a realistic shot at achieving success if they work hard.
But if structural factors deny people access to those basic resources,
Then that reasonable anticipation is undermined from the start for entire groups. The structure itself prevents a fair chance.
and the third tenet, maybe the most powerful one culturally, success is individual control.
Right, the belief that your success or failure is entirely up to you, your talent, your effort. That's it.
And the flip side of that is,
The flip side is that if you don't succeed, even if you tried hard, it must be your own fault. You're a loser. You didn't have what it takes. It completely ignores the context, the structural barriers, the unequal playing field. It reinforces the idea that the system is fine. The problem is the individual.
and that brings us back to the chapter's final big point, doesn't it? The need for a structural focus. We have to stop obsessing over individual behaviors or supposed deficits,
Studying ad nauseum, as the text says, why certain groups don't succeed.
because that focus conveniently distracts from analyzing the real drivers,
Yeah.
economic processes, environmental constraints, or political structures.
Exactly. If you want to actually tackle durable racial inequality, you have to shift the lens, you have to look at the systems. And the very first step in doing that, according to this chapter, is acknowledging and understanding this nervous area of government. You have to manage the organizational reaction before you can effectively address the structural problems. Otherwise, you just retreat into denial or superficial fixes.
Wow. Okay, that was a really intensive deep dive into just chapter one, but absolutely crucial foundational stuff. We've really unpacked this concept of nervousness as a real, tangible barrier in public organizations.
Yeah, tracing it from those classic bureaucratic dysfunctions all the way to how it manifests around structural racism today.
And the key takeaway seems to be that you can't just wish the nervousness away. It's maybe even a sign that you're touching something important.
Right. It's not about eliminating nervousness entirely. That might be impossible, maybe even undesirable if it means you're avoiding the tough issues. The real task for public managers, for all of us in this field, is about effective management of that tension.
Moving the organization consciously from that low-intensity avoidance, maybe through a necessary period of high-intensity change.
Towards that sustainable, productive, moderate intensity state where equity analysis is just part of the job, even if it's uncomfortable sometimes.
So as we wrap up this session for our PP 5340 group, maybe we should keep Fredrickson's core principle in mind. You quoted it earlier.
Yeah, from 1980, but still so relevant. The critical managerial principle for achieving social equity is that majority rule does not overturn minority rights to equal public services. Efficiency and pleasing the majority can't be the only goals.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe a challenge for everyone listening. A provocative question to take away.
What's that?
If you think about a public agency, Maybe one you work for or study or interact with. What's the most immediate, maybe even small, low-intensity area of nervousness around racial equity that organization could be brave enough to start confronting next?
Where's the starting point? Even a small one.
Exactly. Because according to this chapter, finding the courage to take that first step to manage that initial discomfort is how you begin the journey towards real public justice.
A great question to ponder.
Definitely something to think about. Until the next deep dive, keep asking that second question.